absorption of that portion of it, and that's what gives you the immediate green up, which then gives you the chlorophyll and all the downstream effects. Then we have this beast here, the methylurea, and that is slow release from time 0 to time 3 weeks. It's not a particularly complex molecule. The triazone, the 6-membered ring here with the 3 nitrogens on it, slow releases from time 0 to time 6 weeks. Now at the end of 6 weeks, there's not a whole lot left on the leaf, but there is evidence that it's still on the leaf and still continuing to slow release. So there's immediate, time 0 to time 3 weeks, and time 0 to time 6 weeks, depending on the molecule that you're looking at. And look at all these double bonds. It's almost like a broken fishnet, and when the sunlight hits it, it just unzips that layer that's in proximity to the sun, releasing molecules that can be absorbed by the leaf, and then on and on and on. Now, this whole thing, multiply that times 150,000, and that's the polymer. It's way too big to go into those pores that are a billionth of an inch in size, a nanometer in size. And so think of this times 150,000 as a basketball. What it needs to be is a golf ball. The golf ball is that billionth of an inch. So it has to break down in the presence of sunlight over time, hence slow release. Does that make sense? Where the isotope study showed it was 80 times more effective than foliar feed. Further studies by other universities showed that it's somewhere between 6 and 100 times more effective because of its ability to increase photosynthesis. This came from the University of California at Davis, and what they're suggesting here is that 1 pound of nitrogen on the leaf via photosynthesis is equivalent to 4 to 12 pounds in the soil. Part of that is that soil absorption is very inefficient. Okay, how much of your root structure actually touches fertilized soil? You know, you've heard people say that that root is seeking out, it's following, it's running after. That's making a fundamental assumption that root has a brain. It doesn't have a brain. It's like a blind squirrel. It just follows around, bumps into a phosphorus ion or a potassium ion or a micronutrient someplace. But they're not everywhere in there. So there are inefficiencies in soil-based fertilizer. And via the process of photosynthesis, it's somewhere between 4 and 12. Now, our product at 28% nitrogen is 2.9 pounds per gallon. There's nothing magic about it. What it's doing is increasing chlorophyll on the leaf. And then if we put phosphorus with it, it's going to take phosphorus in at that same rate, 100% in 18 hours. If we put potassium with it, or sulfur with it, or micronutrients, the same thing's going to happen. And it will take it in at that same rate. And many of these species are recognized by that plant as a nutrient, like the ionic version of iron or manganese and boron is a micronutrient. And they will absorb into the plant leaf, and of course micronutrients are absolutely necessary in the plant, especially for photosynthesis. Foliar fertilization is by far the most effective way to apply micronutrients. How many of you use Roundup? Okay, good product. I got nothing against it. But like everything else, there are design inefficiencies in that molecule. How many of you heard of Don Huber from Purdue University? Please write this down. Write his name down. He was the primary academician from Purdue University that consulted with Monsanto when they developed the glyphosate molecule back in 1971. And then, of course, they patented the Bt gene, which was a live organism. So the Roundup does what it's supposed to do. It kills weeds. Weeds take up moisture and nutrients from the soil. How much do you actually get on the weed leaf at the time that you apply it? Somebody make a guess. 10%? And the rest of it goes on the ground? Would that be a fair assessment? What happens to it when it hits the ground? Microbial activity breaks it down into a product called AMPA, aminomethylene phosphonic acid. and it is negatively charged. What are all of your micronutrients except for chloride? All positively charged. Manganese +2, zinc +2, copper +1 or +2, iron +2 or +3. Boron in the borate complex is a +1. Calcium is a +2. Magnesium is a +2. Selenium is a +1. All necessary micronutrients for the process of photosynthesis. One will never do what the other does. And without them, if you have a gross lack of one of the micronutrients or a series of micronutrients, you know as well as I do that your crop suffers. They are absolutely necessary. What's the half-life of that AMPA in the soil? Monsanto will tell you it's 178 days. Huber, who probably knows as much or more than most of the scientists inside of Monsanto, says it's 22.5 years. That's how long the half-life is. And then when that half-life is done, now you got another 11.5 years. And when that half-life is done, now you got another 5 or 6 years after that. Think about that for a minute. Even if it was 10 years, you're tying your micronutrients up forever. So you must replace your micros in the soil. We'd like to see you do it preferentially at planting time because that's when your plant gets the biggest bang for its buck. But again, all products have design inefficiencies, design characteristics that are not going to work for you in the end. And Roundup's a good product. Please go online and look up Don Huber. You probably will never use glyphosate again because he's, in his old age, he's kind of a little bit out there. But the chemistry is real. And I've evaluated it on a number of occasions. And the AMPA breaks down, and it breaks at the nitrogen dead center in the molecule. And you have glycine on one side, which is an amino acid, and you have the phosphine functionality on the other side, which is what's tying up with your micronutrients. And that's real. Micronutrients 101, boron, sugar production, intrinsically involved in photosynthesis. Water plus carbon dioxide yields sugar plus oxygen. That's the gross chemical reaction associated with photosynthesis. If you want to create sugar, you've got to have boron present. That's its primary function. Does other things as well, but that's its primary function. Copper, successful protein synthesis. The protein comes from the glycine, which is the simplest amino acid. And that's your brick and mortar to build your plant with. Iron, essential for nitrate reductase, nitrogen reduction and fixation. Without nitrate reductase, you don't have photosynthesis and vice versa. So it's incredibly important for the crops. Manganese plays a direct role in photosynthesis. How many of you have ever grown soybeans? Anybody? Soybeans has a property that if you use too much Roundup on it, it'll tie up the manganese. That AMPA ties up the manganese in the leaf, and you get something called yellow flash. It will recover, but you've lost that photosynthesis for the period of time that it takes to recover. And so, absolutely necessary in the process of photosynthesis. Calcium. Nitrogen metabolism, direct function of photosynthesis. Magnesium, chlorophyll. You saw the molecule that was up there that had magnesium right in the center. Chloride. And the chloride is the only one that's negatively charged. But it enhances the maturity of small grains. It's fungal attack resistance, but it's also a very short-lived process inside of the leaf during photosynthesis. And something called manganic chloride hydroxide is formed for a very short period of time. Without the chloride in there, that plant doesn't go through that process and that plant doesn't grow. Won't go through photosynthesis. Zinc, necessary for chlorophyll production, hence photosynthesis. And molybdenum is necessary for nitrate reductase process. And again, without nitrate reductase, it doesn't matter whether you're photosynthesizing or not. All of our micronutrients are EDTA chelated. Lots of micronutrients are out there. They all come from the salt. They all start with iron sulfate, iron phosphate, manganese phosphate, manganese sulfate. What we do is we take those species and we react it with ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid, EDTA. The word chelate means claw in Greek, and it's grabbing on to that ion. It's not reacting with it. It's just grabbing onto it. It's called an associative bond. It's the weakest of all the bonds. And when it foliar feeds into the leaf, because it is already a size that can be foliar fed, it'll go through that nitrate reductase process because there's nitrogen in it, there's carbon in it. It's a non-ionic molecule and it's non-polar. So it's got all the foliar mechanisms that are necessary, and it will release that ion, and that plant immediately recognizes that ion as a nutrient. So in crop micronutrient problems, if you do tissue testing and it comes up that you're short on iron or you're short on manganese, you can foliar feed that as long as they're EDTA chelated. You cannot feed a salt. Salt will never foliar feed. Why? Here's magnesium sulfate. Is there any nitrogen present? Is there any carbon present? It is an entirely ionic molecule and it's extremely polar. So putting that salt as a micronutrient foliar feeding is just going to run off the leaf onto the ground. Lignosulfonates are used. They're not very good. Flavonoids are getting a little bit better. The flavonoid is very similar to the structure of fulvic acid. Citric acids are actually pretty good. They are fairly good chelating agents. The best are EDTA or the hydroxy functionalities of EDTA to tie up copper and iron as well. So when you're looking at micronutrients, make sure what you're getting. Because if you're trying to foliar feed a micronutrient that's a salt, even though it's got the components in there that are necessary, it's never going to happen. For best results, it should contain nitrogen, most studied foliar nutrient. This is the product. Our KQXRN stands for Kugler Quality Extended Release Nitrogen. Remember the chemical structure that I showed you, that one unit, that one cross-linked unit that looks kind of like a broken fishnet. That's 72% slow-release nitrogen. That has the methylene urea and the triazone in it, times 0 to times 3 weeks, times 0 to times 6 weeks. And then there are the 28% is what I called oligomers. They're those little short snippets. They're immediately available for foliar fertility. XRN is our #1 product. 2075 has shown extreme utility on canola, on corn, on lentils, on peas, what else? Every crop. Pretty much every crop. Why? Because the 20% nitrogen is the KQXRN, and it's carrying with it 7.5% potassium and 5% sulfur. It's one of our favorite products because you're getting 3 nutrients that you're foliar feeding, and you're getting that nitrogen as well. That's helping that process of photosynthesis. Now the KQXRN 2530 is the opposite of the KQXRN. It's a 25% nitrogen, so it's a 2500, and it's 30% slow release versus 72% slow release, which means that 70% is fast release. This product is meant to increase protein applied at soft dough. And Lee will get into some of the results that we found. They've been pretty remarkable. We've only had one trial that didn't give us the bump that we were expecting out of the total number of trials that we've done starting back in 2012, I think. And that's remarkable in its own right. You stress that plant at soft dough. And when you stress that plant, and we all know that protein is a direct result of nitrogen, you're going to increase the protein levels. Probably the average is 1.5. You know, if you factor out the big tall ones like 6% increase and the 0% increase, you average about that 1 to 1.5%. You guys get paid for protein up here. We don't get paid for it in the States. The 1022 and the 1410 were the 2 starter fertilizers. that also can be utilized to foliar feed phos. Because the nitrogen in the 10% nitrogen and the 14% nitrogen are the KQXRN, and they're carrying phos and potassium with them. The 178C has been a very unique product for us because it's a 17% nitrogen is the KQXRN, and it's carrying chloride with it. Now, I mentioned that chloride was an intrinsic component of photosynthesis, right? Does anybody know how fungicide works? But you use them, right? Just don't know how it works. Well, I didn't either until I went back and I did the research. It's chloride. Every fungicide on the market contains chloride or chloride and fluoride. Every one of them. Because it's the active ingredient that helps to protect that plant against fungal attack. We'll get into it a little deeper here in a second. And then our KS maximum is our Canadian micronutrient package. We had to rename it when we registered it up here from the Micromax that we call it down in the States. Foliar urea nitrogen. This is a water solution of nitrogen. 18.4% is the maximum that you can get into a saturated solution of water. And you see the burn. Put 5 gallons of that on. That will recover, no question about it. But you've lost photosynthesis for that period of time that it's going to take to recover. There's the KQXRN put on the field, same day, same amount, no burn. You can't make this product burn. First of all, there are no free nitrates in it. Second of all, it's polymerized urea, so the urea is not breaking down into its components when that sunlight hits it. And those components, you make urea on a cold process from carbon dioxide and anhydrous ammonia. And then you salt it out of solution and it comes out as a solid. I bet you can't guess where that 2075 was sprayed on that pea crop. And that's what it's meant to do. That's exactly what it's designed to do, is to increase the chlorophyll on that leaf, that dark green. This was done in southern North Dakota. First time the guy ever used the product. He got a 6 bushel increase. That's big money when you're talking about some specialty crops. It's compatible with most insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Think about this for a minute. You put KQXRN with Roundup. It won't completely kill Roundup resistant weeds, but it will control them because it's taking the herbicide into the leaf at the same rate, 100% in 18 hours. Roundup is a foliar mechanism. It exhibits all of those things that are necessary. All fungicides are foliar mechanisms. They all exhibit the same chemistry across the board. You put that KQXRN with it, you make it that much more efficient because of the ability of that product to carry and to move into that plant 100% in 18 hours. Non-corrosive, I said that earlier. The KQXRN, been in there for 7 years. We regularly open it up and we insult it with oxygen because oxygen is a component of corrosion for steel. And we put it back on, the 2075. Been in there for 4 years, no corrosion. It will actually take 28% and 32% and reduce the amount of corrosion. It won't stop it. Because the 32%, as you see all the way on the left, there's no nail left in there. That's just all corroded. If you put 28% with our KQXRN, you can top dress with it and not get anywhere near the burn that you would normally get when you top dress wheat with 28%. It helps the volatilization and it helps the burn, helps to reduce the burn dramatically.
This is a plot that was done down south of Regina. Herbicide alone, after 24 hours, you don't see a lot of activity there. We put XRN with it after 24 hours, and you can see there's some drooping here in the leaves. Not a lot, but you can see there's a little bit of silver going on. And this is after 48 hours. So I took those pictures myself. We went down there and then we stayed there, and the next day I went back and took those pictures. It really works, guys. We've got retail outlets in most of our retail outlets around Illinois, in Iowa. Those guys, when you come in to request to have them come out and spray your fields, they just put this in. It's just like putting in an adjuvant. You know, they'll just, and you don't have any choice. Either you put it in there or they're not going to spray your ground. That's just the way it is.
The other thing is that you do not need surfactant with this.
Right.
It has surfactant capabilities in its own right. It will reduce the water surface tension and increase the surface energy on the water. So I always say never use a surfactant with this product. It's saving you money. You don't need ammonium sulfate with it. Absolutely nothing. Never put crop oil with it, because you can get a phyto effect with that crop oil. Unnecessary to put anything else in it. If you already are using a herbicide or a fungicide that has a surfactant in it, there's nothing you can do about that. So follow an order of addition. Put all of your water and your chemical in first and agitate that in your tank, and then put the fertilizer in last so that you can minimize any potential chemical reactions. And some of the fungicides and herbicides have an oil-based component to it. And if you're not careful, that oil base will come to the surface, and that tends to glom up your sprayers.
How many of you have heard of the product Fix? The soil or the water pH? Do not put that with XRN. Jay and I walked fields for about 3/4 of a day because we got a call. He says, your product, of course it's always our product, the new product. He called and said, hey, your product burned my canola, my wheat, he sprayed everything. And we walked, and before we left, Jay says, are you sure you never put anything else in that tank mix? He said, well, I put a pH equalizer or neutralizer in. He said, can I have that label? So he went and got it, brought it back. We got in the truck, left. As we were driving out of the road, Jay called his wife, because she's a chemical engineer. She said, would you look this up on the internet for me? She called back, and you tell the rest of the story, because I don't know this.
It's called a carbamate dihydrogen sulfate. Carbamate is just another chemical name for urea. Dihydrogen sulfate, dihydrogen, H2, sulfate, SO4. It's sulfuric acid. You put sulfuric acid in something that's going to sit on the leaf for a month, what do you think's going to happen? If you got a question, call me. I'll tell you whether or not the chemistry is going to work. Won't take long.
No question.
So LI 700 would fall into the same category. It's a non-ionic surfactant, right?
You do not need a surfactant.
No.
It's going to do nothing but heat things up.
How many liters of XRN is on here?
Okay, on this one here, they used a ½ gallon. The way I judge most of the stuff that I do, I judge it on weed size, I judge it on whether it's a dry atmosphere out there, whether you guys, if you haven't had 2/10 of an inch of rain, you need to put more water with it. So I'll normally run 7 to 10 gallon. If it's dry, I'll run up to 15 gallon. I'll run a little higher pressure, that 30 to 50, depending on. And then judge my weed size. Of course, I can use a quart to 2 quarts when they're like this. And if they get like this and it's hot and dry, I'll bump her up to a gallon. Here's the next one. This is pre-burn on XRN. For this one, we had a gallon of XRN on the left and nothing on the right there with Roundup. Corn, here you get this show you how it's on the leaf. You can see it there on the leaf after, right after application. Here's 24 or 48 hours after application. See that chalky film? That's just like new pavement, and then a year afterwards, it starts turning white. Those are the polymers that Jay was talking about that break down.
It's an oxidation reduction reaction. Same thing that happens with asphalt.
And here's, it is after 72 hours. You can see it there, kind of on the leaf yet. Best time for application?
Is that transition from vegetative to reproductive state. Why? Because you can't feed that plant enough. It can't take up enough water in order to extract those dissolved nutrients that are in the water. There's a kind of an axiom that says the ability of a plant to take up nutrients at this stage is inversely proportional to the availability of those nutrients. This is the time to foliar feed. Help put that plant into high gear so that it's taking up even more and feeding itself at that stage. Example, here's a high yield corn, 300 bushel. You'd agree that tassel is that vegetative to reproductive state change. It's taking up 11.1 pounds of nitrogen per acre per day for 13 days. Taking up 15.3 pounds of potassium per acre per day for 13 days. Soft seed for a 100 bushel soybean crop, taking up 11.4 pounds of nitrogen per acre per day for 21 days. For a net of 548 pounds of nitrogen. It's a huge nitrogen demander. Some of it is fixed nitrogen from the atmosphere. You probably can't get much more than about 60 bushel under perfect conditions. If you want to go higher than that, you're going to have to get or have nitrogen available, either in the soil, foliar fed, or both. Here's canola. This came right from your Canadian Canola Council. You'd agree that elongation to full flower is that change from vegetative to reproductive stages. It's taking up lots of nutrients for those total number of days. But look at this. This is what we found. Fully 40% of all your phos is being taken up at full pod to harvest. You're not putting any more pods on at that stage. You're not putting any more seeds in those pods. But that plant's demanding energy from the nutrients, and it's increasing the weight. And you get paid for that. And tell them what your experience has been.
Well, it's not more seed per pod, but the bigger size, so probably get at least 5 to 6 to 10% more around there, just because of much weight. It's extra.
That's money in your pocket. We'll get into the results now.
Want to go ahead, Aaron, with the results? You want to just go ahead, or what you want to?
I don't know, what do you guys want? You want a 5-minute break, get up, stretch, get a coffee? Sure, let's do that.
Okay, that'll be
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.